Reporting all Federation starships in the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrants. This is your host, Josh Pritchett, organizer of the Northern Virginia Star Trek Meetup, author, and artist. And I am joined today with my usual partner in crime, Mr. Chris Pabon.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Happy Palm Sunday. Feliz Domingo de Ramos. Guten Morgen. And for all the people who had such a great time like Josh and I at GalaxyCon, thank you for coming to say hello, and we look forward to seeing you in person again next year.
Absolutely. That was a very fun time last week. And if you guys didn't get a chance, GalaxyCon is something, those of us who live in the great Commonwealth of Virginia have dreamed about for years, a major convention right here in the heart of our own state in the capital city. Please, next year, come out, support us. We had a huge turnout. David Tennant, Charlie Cox, Vince D'Onofrio, Bill Shatner, Walter Koenig, and, of course, Jonathan Frakes and Nana Visitor, amongst many, just a few of the people that were there.
Please.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And definitely next year, come on out. And if you like Star Trek, science fiction, Doctor Who, professional wrestling, come on out to GalaxyCon. So, well, Chris, this week's episode was rather exciting, as always, but we kind of got to see sort of the darker side of Starfleet, didn't we?
We sure did, Josh. I gotta say now, I thought that this episode, while good, was maybe a little less. It broke the streak for me of the previous episode was so good, but this episode was even better. But that's okay because he can't run white hot all the time, and they got to give Jonathan Frakes a break here and a breather. So while I thought the episode was good, I don't think it was quite as good as all the episodes that preceded it.
Yeah, I thought too it was lacking in a couple of things. Things I think we'll point out here when we get into our discussion. And so, without further ado, let's do a recap of the episode. Engage. So, this week's episode opens on the bridge of the Titan. Seven is sitting in the captain's chair, and she is talking to somebody. We can't tell who it is just yet. Then the camera pans around, and we see it is our old friend Tuvok, now Captain Tuvok, apparently, that she is communicating with. And she is trying to ascertain if he knows the location of Admiral Janeway, but also is Tuvok a changeling? So she begins a series of questions, like mentioning and that she gives the phrase, "This whole situation is like a deck of cards, not unlike the game we used to play." Tuvok replies, "As I recall, you defeated me countless times in that game." So then we hear the Voyager theme and think, okay, it really is Tuvok. Then Seven tries one more question about meeting at a particular planet, and Tuvok seems willing to agree to it, but Seven realizes that they can't go to that planet because there's a very deep anti-Vulcan sentiment on that planet. So she realizes the gig is up. They're being traced. Geordi and Liam have to pull the plug on the communication. Seven demands to know from the changeling what they have done with her friend. And the changeling quickly changes into a version of Riker looking, well, near death. So that is basically just kind of a message that, when we're done with you, you're going to beg us to die. So, Chris, you want to go to what happened next?
Thank you, Josh. So yeah, the whole episode has a bunch of mini subplots going on between different characters. And like one of the subplots involves Jack and Geordi's daughter. And there's a moment that they share in the turbo lift that Jack realizes, I can hear her thoughts. He goes to his Admiral Picard and says, listen, Riker's really good for me. Now he's gone. Perhaps we should just we should just trade myself for him because we've been on our back heels and nothing seems to work. And at this moment, Jean-Luc thinks about it and says, well, maybe we do have the advantage after all. And so that's going to set up another plot between him and Beverly. And what this means is that they recognize when, as the changes are trying to find them, because Frontier Day is coming very soon, and it's becoming very apparent when Vadek is having a conversation with whoever the big bad is or her boss, that if they don't have Jack, everything's going to fall apart. And this is also leading to the question of why Jack is needed. And Picard tries in another subplot involving Geordi and Data to get the answers from Data about why they would need Jack. And there's a moment where, and this brilliant acting by Brent Spiner, who they reactivate him and he goes back and forth between Data and Lore. And Data confirms that that erotic syndrome may have been a misdiagnosis on Picard, but Lore keeps on interfering. And Picard asks, well, what if we just erase Lore? And Geordi explains that this is more work of art than engineering, and that he wouldn't know how to do it. And while there's a partition, he thinks soon put in the partition to prevent Lore from overwhelming Data. But right now, both entities are at war for dominancy in that particular body. So all of this leads to, as the changelings are looking for Picard and for Jack, there's a transmission from Riker, but it's an encoded transmission that is meant to give away where the captain might be, and it determines it's the Shriek. And Liam is like, okay, let's not respond to that. Picard is like, no, wait a minute, maybe we should. And this involves all his plan that he was talking with Jack about how they're going to turn the table on Vadek and the Shriek. And next thing you know, they do answer, and the Shriek comes upon what seems to be a derelict now Titan that seems to have engaged and been on the wrong side of a fight with a Vulcan cruiser. And so, even though they suspect it might be a trap, because they can't get good readings of what's going on with the ship because of the nearby exposed core of a Vulcan cruiser, Vadek realizes that time is ticking, and they need Jack now. Jack is on that ship. They need to go in, so they decide it's boarding time. Josh?
So Vadek leads her minions aboard the Titan, and Jack steps out of the shadows, and Vadek says something rather interesting. She doesn't threaten him. She says, we just want to take you to someplace very wonderful, dear boy. Okay, anytime you use the phrase dear boy, that's just creepy, okay? At any rate, so Jack, of course, starts running, and a firefight ensues. The Titans team from the bridge is using a series of force field traps to capture Vadek's soldiers. And then ultimately, Picard and Beverly capture Vadek in a force field in sickbay. And they demand answers from her. Meanwhile, Jack and Geordi's daughter are, they're trapped in the corridor with several of Vadek's soldiers that are trapped behind force fields trying to get at them. And Vadek explains to Picard that she and several of her fellow changelings were captured by Section 31. They were experimented on, and Section 31 had the bright idea of, hey, let's try to make them work for us. Let's try to, make them do our bidding. And the result is, of course, Vadek is, she's somewhat insane. And Picard and Beverly decide they have to make a decision. They're not going to get anything out of Vadek. She's not going to tell them what the plans are. And they have to protect Jack no matter what. So they're about to make an ultimate decision. Meanwhile, one of Vadek's soldiers manages to grab Geordi's daughter. But suddenly Jack has discovered that his mental abilities enable him to kind of pantomime in a way so that she can move just like he does. So in a scene that like right out of Cobra Kai, she starts tumbling and jumping in sync with Jack as the guard tries to grab a hold of her, and then finally she's able to get her hand on the phaser and kill Vedek's soldier. Meanwhile, Lore has taken over the body and has managed to hack his way into the Titan's computer mainframe and is trying to control the ship. Chris?
Which, of course, because Lore likes chaos, means that he's going to deactivate the force fields. And the only thing preventing the soldiers from coming upon Jack and Cindy are those same force fields. And so, of course, because he's relatively sadistic as well, Lore allows Jody to be watching what is happening with his daughter. And Jody goes to Data / Lore and pleads with him, like, don't do this, please don't do this. And realizing that Lore, you can't really reach him with logic, he tries to reach out emotionally to the emotional part that is Data, saying, please, open this door. Like, rarely do we get a chance, and this is very true, to say things that we wanted to say. And when you died, like, it broke me. But you and the memory of you helped pull me together and make me like a better father. And so that enables Data to reestablish control. And that leads to the scene that you just described, Josh, where he says, I'm here, Jordy, I'm going to try and help. And force fields are dropped, and then Cindy manages, with the help of Jack inside her head, to vanquish the soldier. But at the same time, this leads to her freaking out, like, and point the phaser at him, saying, like, what the hell is going on? Like, were you inside my head? And they both decide to run off. And this leads to a very interesting scene of what's happening with Picard and Beverly, that, Vadek is not giving them anything, and she's so calm, cool, and collected in an evil type of way that Beverly's like, listen, she hasn't told us anything that she didn't want to tell us, and death has come on board when she came on board. So I think we just got to take her out. And Picard is like, well, has our moral compass changed so much over these years that they're basically telling about committing homicide? And she's like, to protect my son, yes. And so they both come up with there's this look between both of them, and they take their phasers, and they're going to kill her. And at that point is when Lore takes down the force fields, and she manages to escape, despite the fact they're firing the pulse phaser directly at her in her liquid shape. And I want to talk later, Josh, in the section about the difference between pulse phasers and beam phasers and their effect on changelings. But that's another moment. So force fields are down, and Data is trying to reestablish control from engineering to, fix what all the chaos Lore has started. But this means that force fields are down, the soldiers can move again. So logically, where are the soldiers going to go? They're heading for the bridge. And so they're heading towards like Turbulus 7, and they get the message to Shaw, like, don't let them pass. And Shaw's like, yeah, they're not going to pass. But sadly, Shaw is no Gandalf. And so they do manage to pass. And they're on the way to the bridge, which is, again, something I want to talk about later on, about like the security of the bridge. And they do end up taking the bridge. Like, the turbolift opens, and then a Shaw that's badly beaten and bruised like emerges, and everyone's like, what's going on here? And then as soon as they turn, the 7 turns her back, like, the changelings show up, and Vadek is now in control of the ship, and Jack and Cindy manage to reunite with Picard and Beverly in sickbay, and Vadek is doing the classic evil guy gloat of like, hey, I am now captain of the Titan. But, she seems like she wants there to be an end game here, and she says, Jack, it is time for you to know, like, where you came from and seek.
Yeah, that like I said, it was very intense in scenes, but I think that we're going to get into a few things here shortly with our review. There's some things I didn't like, but there's some things I did like. So without further ado, let's get into the good, the bad, and the Gorn. So I think, the prime thing I think was best about this episode was Geordi's scene with Data and Lore, where he's trying to reach and try to get past Lore to communicate with Data, to urge him to keep fighting Lore, to keep going, that he needs him. He's the only one who could save Geordi's daughters. It was a really good scene, very emotional. One of LeVar's greatest performances. I thought that this idea that, okay, wait a minute, maybe Picard didn't have Aramonic syndrome at all, that there was something else wrong with him. I thought, okay, wow, that's intriguing. That's kind of a bit of a good and the bad. We'll get into that in the next part of this. I loved seeing Tuvok back, even though it turned out he was a changeling. The fact that Tim Russ had the pointy ears back on and was talking with Seven was just so awesome. It's been really good to see more of the folks from Voyager showing up. And let me think. I love the whole thing with Sydney and Jack. It's like, oh, okay, this relationship is interesting. But is she going to be scared of him now? Probably, yeah. That he knows what she's thinking. We're still not 100% certain why. We have theories, but our theories are not always correct. And that's all I've got for right now. Chris?
So again, with the preface that I thought this was a good episode, it broke the streak for me of how each better than the previous one, but there were elements I liked a lot. For example, I love the fact that they were hiding out at a scrapyard in the Chantaka system, because as Deep Space fans, Deep Space Nine fans will remember, the Chantaka system is where the Federation gets its ass kicked in Tears of the Prophets. So I love that nod there, and I also loved seeing Tuvok. I mean, even if he is like fake Tuvok, it was really great to see Tim Ross, and it just leads to the trend, which I thought was good, of an entire series of unexpected cameos. I mean, like we saw in the previews for the season, like the images of people who are going to appear, but what I think works even better is like how they have managed to like smoke and mirror us and make us see the focus on the people who are going to be here and lose track of it. Hey, Ro might show up, Tuvok might show up. I mean, so I love this cast of like people who we don't expect to appear who actually are appearing. I thought it was a tour de force by Brent Spiner, as he seamlessly went from Lore to Data, and you could just see the emotional conflict, and it really did make me cringe when Data's like, help me, Captain, help me, please help me, and and you can see Picard is like, I saw him die, now he's asking for help. I mean, please turn him off. It's just, I can't go through this anymore. And equally matching Brent Spiner is LeVar Burton's emotional display as Geordi when his daughter's in jeopardy trying to reach Data. And it was somewhat reminiscent, I thought, of the scene of from Star Trek II Wrath of Khan, when Kirk and Spock are separated by the door, and you have that emotional, even though it's just so brief, but you have that emotional display like ship safe. I mean, they're talking between the door, and it's the symbolic. They can't connect to each other, but Geordi's trying as hard as he can to connect to Data. I love the symbolism there, and I also like the fact that it seems finally we're going to get some type of resolution. Although it's going to be next episode about like what Jack is, and we'll talk more about that in the Gorn, because there's something that you mentioned earlier in our season, Josh. I think you actually are hit the bullseye on this, and I also like the fact that we got to see not only Beverly and Jean Luc discussing, are we willing to kill for our son? Basically, that's what it came down to, and it seemed like the answer is yes. So, um, there's some definite lines of areas of gray here. More so when we see what happened with the changelings that were captured in Section 31, and like it makes sense. I mean, it was horrible to see, but it makes sense that Section 31 would have done this. I mean, it's you would not have seen this in the Star Trek of maybe 20 years ago. Certainly, you wouldn't have seen it while Gene Roddenberry was around, but seeing it now, I mean, it works.
Yeah. Getting into the bad, that's yeah, I it works. And the only thing I would say about it, I think they spent more time on that. I wanted more answers about Jack. I'm kind of like, could we please move that part along? I do want to know what's going on with Jack. But yeah, the thing we have to remember here, and this is going back to something about, I'll talk more about this in the Gorn, about Section 31. They're not actually Starfleet, though. Originally, when they were conceived, they were this organization that was just outside of Starfleet that nobody knew about, but now everybody knows about them. And it's like, yeah, apparently they've done some really bad things. And it is coming back now to bite the Federation in the ass massively. And you're right. Gene would not have gone for this, but I think it does work also. The only thing I would say is that I think I would have liked to have seen, like I said, I want them to please hurry up and tell us what the heck is going on with Jack, what's going on in his head, and what is the deal with this thing. If it wasn't Aromatic syndrome, what was going on inside of Picard? I have some ideas. Again, I'll get into in the Gorn and then predictions, but my only real complaint about the episode was it just on those things it was a little bit slow. That shouldn't overshadow the fact that, yeah, all the performances were amazing. I think we definitely had a real reaction to when we see the turbolift doors open and Shaw gets tossed out because I saw this meme. I passed it around. I forgot to bring it in here today, but basically the meme says in the first episode, God, who is this jerk? And then in the second picture, it's like, if they kill him, I'm suing Paramount because he's grown on us so much in the last 7 episodes. And we don't want to see him go. So he's become a beloved character. But yeah, I think I'd like them to hurry up and answer a few questions because we've only got 3 episodes to go now. And they're doing great otherwise. It's just, let's quit drawing this out. Let's get into some of this. So, Chris, what didn't work for you for this episode?
So a few things, Josh. I thought that the mini arcs throughout the episode did not add up to a greater whole. I thought that it was an interesting try. I mean, I thought the director tried something new and compared to the other episodes, but it just didn't work. I mean, yes, it emphasized individual performances very well, but contributing to the larger story, I would have dropped maybe a couple of them. It just didn't really add up to a greater whole for me. And so I would say the director tried something new, but it didn't quite work. After that, my other major thing, and I understand again in terms of if you have to give Jonathan Frakes a break from directing, you had to give Michael Dorn a break from stealing the show in every scene that he shows off in. So, I mean, you really missed Worf here. I mean,
I did.
We really missed Worf and Raffi. I mean, I can only hope. I have an idea of where he is, and I'll get to that in the predictions for the next segment. And then, and again, I think this is the director's choice, but we've been here so many times about the taking of the bridge. I mean, how many times have we seen the bridge taken? And so when are you going to get to the point that you have force fields installed at the entrance to the bridge in case the ship is being taken over? My one question would be, okay, if Data's back in control and he could lower the force fields, if you know they're heading to the bridge, couldn't you erect force fields at the entrances to the turbo lifts so they couldn't get in? 1. Or 2, wouldn't you, if you know they're coming to the bridge and you're probably going to lose the bridge, wouldn't you transfer control to engineering or just lock out the computer like we saw Data do in Star Trek First Contact? So, again, a good idea, but the implementation was a little sloppy. I mean, we've seen the bridge taken over. and there's many ways they could have perhaps prevented the bridge from taking over. And like thirdly, and a more experienced director probably. I know this director directed the Star Trek Discovery episode. Oh God, regarding when they traversed the spatial barrier. The name is the name of the episode is escaping me, but um, there's also the practical aspect of, again, if Data's back in control and you now have a way to track the changelings because of the isotope in them, why not just beam all of them out into space?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm buying that you couldn't track them before because the scanners can't differentiate, but now that you can tell where they are in the ship. Data's back in control in engineering. Just give me an explanation of why you're not beaming everyone off the ship all at once. So there's that, and um, I want to talk about this more in the Gorn after you talked about the Section 31 experimentation, which is the difference between pulse phasers and beam phasers.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Chris. So, what I wanted to bring up about Section 31 and its experimentation on the changelings and just its actions in general. Historically, at least to the last 70 years, and I'm not specifically naming any one group, it seems like intelligence organizations, even ones in quote in democratic nations like ours, often do things for certain expediency, but then decades later end up being the wrong decision and ends up basically vilifying us. In this case, you have the experimentation by Section 31 on the changelings, and you would think Section 31, who by all accounts are supposed to be really smart people, would have had the hindsight to look back on history and say, this might not be a good idea, for morality reasons, but also because things like this tend to come back on us. Unless they were so confident that this would never come back on us, it would eventually. Somebody might find out, or something like this could go wrong. And clearly it did. But, as I watched it, I couldn't help but think of, various things that, and it was very stark, very disturbing. I really liked it in telling that part. And obviously the changeling is not going to differentiate between PICARD and the crew of the Titan and Section 31 as far as they're concerned, because the changelings already hate solids to begin with. This just reinforces their hatred. So the fact that this was done to Vatic and her people is, of course, a huge travesty, and one I hope that is addressed later on in the series or in a future Star Trek show. That, Section 31 does at some point need to be called to account, I think, for what happened here in this episode and for other things that they've done before. Like the original changeling virus that was used on Deep Space Nine. They were responsible for the development of that. Again, like I said, there might be many things that they felt were absolutely necessary for them to do, but have sometimes later on probably turned out to be very bad decisions. So with rumors going around that there might very well be a Section 31 series, again, that's something to think about. So, Chris, you were going to say about pulse phasers.
Well, I just want to reply to what you just said, and I think the issue with Section 31 is that they don't view the long term; they just view the short term. It's sort of like corporations that nowadays only care on the annual dividends for stakeholders. So they view the Federation as the stakeholders, and so they're thinking, well, we're going to do this now to maximize value for the Federation, and we're not going to worry about long term because long term will be someone else's problem. Yeah, I think there is no long term view for Section 31 beyond ensure the Federation stays relevant, and they maximize the short term versus the long term. And yeah, you're right. The experimentation was quite horrible, and um, you know, thinking the arrogance of thinking they could take these prisoners and convert them into the ideal spies, it's just beyond belief. And so, yeah, um, they may think they serve the Federation, and perhaps they do in the short term, but in the long term, they're going to cause a lot of harm. And speaking of causing harm, I want to talk briefly about the difference between pulse phasers and beam phasers and their effect on the changelings. And anyone out there, feel free to contribute. Um, but it just seems to me that um, when you see the beam phasers, like the ones that Worf uses, okay, they take out the changelings for good, like they vaporize them. These newer pulse phasers that we see, that they kind of look like Romulan disruptors. They've got the handle, um, and they fire pulse beams. It takes a lot to take out a changeling. I mean, we saw Shaw shoot one in the head, and then he passes him trying to catch Vedek, and then he rises again, and then we see in a previous episode, we see Jack shoot one in the head 3 times, as if he knew, like, okay, it's not going to take once with this type of energy beam pulse. It takes 3 to the head. So, I'm not sure if it's Starfleet has a mix of like pulse and beam, but it clearly seems the beam is far more effective than the pulse. So why are you not arming everyone with just like with beam phasers that seem a hell of a lot more effective than your pulse phasers against changelings? I mean, they can take a few hits. They can't, but it takes only one from the pulse. I mean, from the beam phaser.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have not liked this particular design of phaser at all. Mostly because just various things. I'm a TNG era fan. I like their phasers better, even though the first versions of them we saw looked like little hand vacuums that they used to have in the 80s. But they got better, and the grip got better, more dynamic. But again, that goes back to something Gene Roddenberry wanted when they were creating the next generation. He didn't want the phasers to look like guns because he felt like in the future weapons would not necessarily look like weapons. And that might be true in the future, but it had to play to an audience of the 20th century. So, we have those, and I liked them a lot. I thought that they were easy to change the settings on. If you've ever seen a mock-up of what they look like, and I'm going to do something with this. I'm going to talk about this in another broadcast. But so yeah, I do think that the beams, like, go back to another great example. Do you remember the episode of Deep Space Nine where Sisko, O'Brien, Worf, and Odo had to infiltrate a Klingon celebration to reveal a changeling infiltrator?
Spoiler alert, turns out it was Martok.
Yes, it was Martok. And when it's revealed, the Klingons pull out their disruptors and start firing, and they're firing. And of course, the Klingons are using those pulse weapons, and usually they're pretty good at disintegrating stuff, but with a changeling, it takes several Klingon shots to take it down. Whereas a focused beam of intensified plasma, like in a standard phaser, could do it. So I don't know why I really, really hate the new design of the phasers. They haven't grown on me. I guess somebody in the design department said, hey, we should make them look more like guns. And it's like, okay, let's go back to the classic design. Oh, let's put this little hand grip in front of it, which makes no sense. And again, because this is this is not a kinetic weapon like a handgun. You don't need to hold it like this. And, I know that looks cool, but it doesn't make sense. Sorry, but I totally see your point.
Right. So, and the other thing I want to talk about here in this section of our Gorn is, again, the taking over of the bridge. I mean, like, the bridge gets taken over a lot. Like we saw in Strange New Worlds with Captain Angel, how successful she was in taking over the bridge of Pike's Enterprise. Okay. And that was like, 150 years ago? I mean, in designing the ships, wouldn't you design it to have mechanisms in place to prevent the bridge from being taken over? Let me toss some examples out there. So the holodeck is an independent power system, right?
Yeah.
Can't you have independent power systems for force fields at the entrances to the turbolifts to prevent people from coming in?
Makes sense.
can't you have something to manually lock the doors of the turbo lift so that they will not open? Can't you have? We know from Strange New Worlds that there's weapons in the councils and stuff if they need to like suddenly pop out some weapons to defend themselves, right? So Shaw mentions blow the turbo lift. I thought that was great. I thought Seven should have blown the turbo lift. Of course, there'd be many Star Trek fans who'd be in anger because that would have like been the death of Shaw. But yes, something like okay, that you can blow the turbo lifts. That's an excellent idea to prevent people from coming to take the bridge. But if you can do that, can you not just cut all power to the turbo lift and just say okay, we're cutting power. The turbo lift can't come up anymore. Lock the doors, put in force fields. I mean, there's any number of things, it seems to me, you can do in ship design to protect that bridge because historically you have seen that the bridge kids taken over a lot. And again, following, because I'm on a roll here, again, can't you just have Data beam everyone out into space now that you can track them?
Yes. I totally agree with everything you just said. I would even like to throw out an idea of my own.
Okay.
Blast doors.
Blast doors.
Yes, just have blast doors that drop down in front of the turbo lifts and the entrance to the bridge and just lock them out. Fill the Jeffries tubes with some sort of anesthetic gas that you could pipe out later. So anybody trying to climb in there is going to suddenly get real sleepy, real suddenly, or just, or even cut the oxygen flow to the Jeffries tubes if you need to. Although probably the gas would be better.
I am totally with you. Blast doors. I mean, they have them in Star Wars. I mean, once upon a time, they tried to take the hologram, communication from Star Wars. That was not a good idea. What would be a good idea? Ship design. Have some blast doors you can only activate from inside the bridge, independently controlled. They can't be controlled from engineering. They can't be controlled from anywhere else. Just drop the blast doors.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing is, during battle situations, just lock the turbo lifts from getting to the bridge, unless medical personnel only can get to the bridge during, when you're in a situation like that, that's another thought. I mean, there are a lot of, you would have thought Starfleet would have thought this through. And in the real world, probably they would have come up with scenarios to block people from being able to get into the bridge or the engineering room during a crisis situation like that. I mean, I could see where okay, Khan in the original series could pull it off because they thought he was contained and he really wasn't. He was able to move quickly and take over the Enterprise back in Space Seed. But now that should not be an excuse. Okay, you've had more than 200 years of Starfleet that we've had operations like this go down, where somebody, be it the Borg, the Klingons, the Romulans, the Cardassians, have taken a Federation vessel as okay, some simple security measures was done. But anyway.
When we were at Shirley, Josh, Jonathan Frakes gave an excellent talk. And if anyone who has a chance, go see Jonathan Frakes talks. He's really good. And a question from the audience was as a director, if you see something in the script that doesn't quite make sense, do you have the ability to say no, guys, wait a minute, we can't do this because it doesn't make sense. And so, he communicated that if he has enough time when he's reading the script, and he can suggest no, we shouldn't be able to do this. And I think that's kind of the flaw that we had here in the director for this episode, that they perhaps are not as versed in Star Trek lore to realize, okay, bridge takeovers happen a lot. So to justify this, I've got to add this additional element. All it would have taken was, for example, to say, Geordi, stop the turbo lifts, or Geordi, beam them out. And a simple word from Data hasn't completely reestablished total control over ship's functions yet. I mean, just something as simple as that to justify, okay, this is then why they could have so easily taken over the bridge. But I think it was, this lack of perhaps, can we say, Trek knowledge on part of the director that then enabled this to sort of happen. So, yeah, I am blaming the direction a little bit on this one.
Yeah, even in my own, one thing I struggle with when I'm writing a story and I got to think, gosh, okay, well, what if the character does this? Why can't they do that? This doesn't make sense to me, yeah. And certainly in Star Trek, like we just said, you run into them, same thing. It's like the old scenario when, okay, the Borg is opening fire on the Enterprise and, they keep hitting the same section of the Enterprise. Why don't we reinforce that so it makes it harder? Well, the real reason that they kept firing that section was they kind of had that stock footage. They didn't have time to make more scenes with the Borg hitting different parts of the Enterprise. But yeah, there should be like no reason for this. Like, even if you have to have a transporter inhibitor on the bridge to block, somebody beaming in there directly, or, like we said, blast doors. I mean, blast doors, I like them better than force fields because, okay, if you cut the power, then that means the force field will go away. And if you have blast doors, okay, well, then you can't get those open without power. So, it doesn't make sense for you to cut the power because, unless you want to spend 2 or 3 hours trying to burn your way with a phaser through the door to get at your target. So, yeah.
Or at the very least, there should be some type of transporter, independently powered transporter system there that will only beam you to, let's say, to engineering. But you lock out controls, transfer them to engineering, and then the whole bridge crew, short-range transporter, everyone just gets beamed like to engineering.
Yeah, right. Like, it only be, Starfleet personnel whose DNA patterns are all on file. Okay, so everybody with this DNA patterns, they go to engineering. Everybody else, we beam them into outer space and don't, put their molecules back together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I know that seems a little bit sadistic, and Starfleet doesn't really like to be as, cruel, but I think at a certain point, well, they don't even need to be in outer space. Just contain them in the transporter buffers and then beam them into the brig minus their weapons, because we've seen them do something like that before too. So
absolutely.
I mean, remember what happened in the episode Rascals, where PICARD and team managed to capture the Ferengi and beam them one at a time into the brig. That was great. So we need more of that. And I'm sure the brigs have got to be changeling proofed by now.
We would hope. So Josh, here's a question for you before we move on. So we've seen Commander Hansen. We've seen Captain Tuvok.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that do you think Harry Kim is still an ensign?
I hope not. I hope not. I swear to Kalis, why he didn't get just bumped up to lieutenant?
7 seasons.
7 seasons. You couldn't promote this guy to a lieutenant at least? I mean, heck, he was practically running key systems of the ship. I mean, did what? I mean, they promoted and demoted and re-promoted Paris. Come on already. Give this man a promote. He's got to, I'm hoping to God he's at least a commander, maybe a captain. I don't. We can hope, right?
Being a great lieutenant. I mean,
what do we got to do? What is his evaluations looking like? What is he not doing right here?
I mean, terrible evaluations.
I guess. I mean, we got to ask Garrett Wong if next time we see him at shore leave or something about what the hell's going on. Well, I'm sure millions of people have asked him about it, and I'm sure he wonders. I'm sure he sits up late at night wondering what was going on there.
Longest serving ensign in Star Trek history.
We need to get him and Kate Mulgrew and ask Kate straight up, Kate, why didn't you give this guy a promotion? I mean,
like, what did he do to you? Like, what did he do to your coffee?
What went wrong there? Did you?
I mean, I'm imagining a scenario where, okay, Kate Mulgrew, Admiral Janeway definitely seems to be really high up there in Starfleet now.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like she's saying, like, yeah, no, he's still an ensign.
Well, I mean, even Kate jokes about it. She says when she's doing something with it, she says, "My eternal ensign." Like, what happened there? But at the very least, I do hope. Yeah, I hope we find out that Harry has gotten his promotion by now. So, yeah, there's that. We could, I would love to see more people from both Deep Space Nine and Voyager show up before the end of this series, because that would be a good sound off. Because I mean, as you know, you and I have talked about, when we talk about the Next Generation era, we don't just mean Star Trek: The Next Generation. We mean Star Trek: Deep Space Nine, Star Trek: Voyager.
Correct.
Because they were all shows that ran in that sweet spot of the 24th century. And now that you have such a drive by fans to say, hey, the sweet spot is now everything after 2401. We want more Star Trek in the 25th century, not the 23rd or the 31st. The 25th is our sweet spot now. So hopefully, again, we will see more of our beloved characters in this show, Picard, or in a future Star Trek set in the 25th.
Star Trek Legacies.
Yes, well, that matter of fact, yes. Me and a dear friend of ours, Mary Fan, were talking about that the possibility of having a series that would have Worf and Seven and Rafi leading a crew that might include Jack Crusher, the LaForge daughters, maybe even Molly O'Brien, and possibly Alexander Rashenko. You know, there's a ton of possibilities to finally bring all these people together into one big show. So we can, from our words to Kalis' ears, is all I got to say.
And Ensign Kim.
And Ensign Kim. Hopefully Lieutenant Junior grade by then, but hopefully. Poor Harry. He gets so much crap. I love that guy.
So I guess now we move into our projections for the future.
Yes. I think the big floating head is Gul Dukat.
So, Josh, I want to sing your praises here because at the start of our show, you said Power 8, and I wasn't quite sure, but the more and more, it really looks like you bullseye this, and I think it is a Power 8. That we do know that Picard was involved with the archaeology, and so I think at some point on one of his archaeological digs, and I will even go as far as point out that it might have been in the episode Shore Leave, where we first get introduced to the character Vosh, that the instrument that they have is destroyed. And I'm just going through my notes now to try and see if I can remember what exactly. I thought it was called Toulouse. Gosh, I can't remember. But we know that to free a Power 8, you need to break the receptacle. That's how Gul Dukat had the Power 8 absorbed into him. So at the end of the episode Shore Leave, the artifact they're looking for is destroyed by the Enterprise, so that the Vorgons can't actually get their hands on it. So I'm wondering if that's the moment that perhaps weakened by the Enterprise's phasers, Power 8 managed to get itself into Picard. And so follow me on this one. And so when he conceived Jack with Beverly, part of the Power 8 might have been separated from Picard. So that's why they need Picard's body and they need Jack to reintegrate the Power 8 into one single entity, who then is going to try to use the fact that all the fleet is assembled in the Sol system to try to destroy them all at once. So I'm here to sing your praises because I think you're right. I think it is a Power 8, and I think it's been divided because of how Picard conceived Jack, and that's why they need the body of Picard. That's what part of his essence is, and then they also need Jack because that's where the remaining part went into, and that's why we can see he have these abilities. And the key thing, he's seen a lot of red. Red is associated with the Power 8, so that's what I think is happening. And I think you nailed this one. I had said previously on the show that I thought they wanted the body so that they could use, because we know the ships are linked, they could use the Borg part still in his original body to take over the fleet. But I think I was wrong, and I think you were right on this one.
Yeah, I think it's very possible that, that this is a Power 8 thing. And does that mean we're going to get the emissary will return?
See, okay, so when we started the series, I didn't think that was possible. But after having the unexpected appearances of Ro for a whole episode, of Tuvok, I still think we're going to see Admiral Janeway at some point. Mm-hmm. But given the fact that they've been very, very, very good at covering up unexpected appearances, and you really can't have a Star Trek Legacy or Star Trek show without addressing some of Deep Space Nine, which they're hinting at, right? Like them hiding out in the Chantaka system, for example.
Hmm.
It just seems they're prepping us, the changelings. It just seems that they're slowly prepping us for um, the final piece that is needed to start talking about D Space Nine, which would be the return of Avery Brooks, the emissary. And how cool would it be if we had a scene where we had like Picard, Janeway, and Cisco all together in one room? I mean, how better to like set the stage for continued Star Trek legacies using different characters in different shows than if you had that. So I think I'm with you on this one now that if you
Yeah.
have the pirates, you need to have an appearance of the emissary, and it would totally be justified because if you have a pirate, you need someone to stop it. So this would be the perfect justification for Cisco to leave the Temple of Prophets. If he's got to go, this would be the one thing aside from Jake being in danger. It would to get him to leave, which would be like, I've got to save the Federation because only I, as the emissary, would have the power to stop a pirate. So
Yeah.
I think we may be getting there.
Yeah, and plus it would fit with the idea that if we're going to conclude a lot of storylines that we never got around to concluding, it would be nice to have Cisco and Picard sort of meet, and Cisco let Picard know, I forgave you a long time ago for what happened to my first wife. And it was all part of the plan. So I guess that's something we could think about as, I don't know, but
And
yeah,
also,
I really am hoping for that. I'm
And also,
hoping.
Josh,
Yeah.
since both of us were at GalaxyCon, Nana Visitor was looking great, as in like TV ready great. So I have to wonder if we may not be getting a Nana Visitor drop by before the next 3 episodes,
It would be awesome if Colonel Kira Nerys or possibly Captain Kira Nerys shows up
or
and
or Vedic.
or well, yeah, that was in the books, but somehow I don't think
Okay.
I don't think that Kira would really want. She's devoutly religious, but I don't think she would. She, given all the palace intrigues that went on with what Vedic Baral and Kai Wynn and all the that, I don't think that would. I think she would want to continue to serve Bajor and the Federation in something like either the Bajoran militia
Okay.
or Starfleet. But maybe,
Well,
maybe,
although we have seen in Lower Decks that he is not a Vedic. That's true.
yeah, she was still colonel and commanding Deep Space Nine. So, and also given the fact that we saw the Defiant and the Voyager, is it possible that we break those beauties out of dry dock and get them into action? And we have this big battle where we have the Titan, the Voyager, and the Defiant taking on. I don't know. Maybe the Jem'Hadar come through the wormhole. I don't know. There's a
Well,
lot going on.
I think definitely there's probably at least a couple of Federation ships that are probably all manned by changelings at this point. So I think you will see some type of throwdown. Um,
Yeah.
Josh, I'm going to go ahead and say my other thing
Mm-hmm.
forecasting as I gaze into my crystal ball is that the reason why we have not seen Worf and Rafi in this episode is because they did hit. They're coming back. I think while the majority of the crew of the Shriek is on the Titan, they are sneaking on board the Shriek to rescue Riker and Troy.
Yeah, I think that's possible. So I've just been told by our producers that we need to go ahead and wrap this up.
Oh yeah, that's
So,
true.
Chris, you want to tell everybody where to find you?
Yes, indeed, Josh. So everyone, you can find me on Instagram at Verde Cosplay, and if you are at GalaxyCon, it's very possible you might be featured on my feed. And also a shout out in a couple of weeks. Chantilly, Virginia, we're going to have Big Lick Comic Con, so hope to see a lot of you there.
Yep. And I remain Josh Pritchett. You can find me at Josh Pritchett Jr. on Facebook. My book, Bigfoot and Other Tales of the Supernatural, is still available on Amazon and Kindle. And I just want to say before we close out, next week, because of the Easter holiday, we will be on Saturday afternoon at noon. Please join us then for our review of episode 8 of Star Trek Picard. Until then, live long and prosper.
Peace along life. Happy Easter.
Kapla.
Oh, and happy Passover.
Yep. Happy Passover.
Oh, it said, yeah, okay. All right, later, Josh.
Later, Chris. Bye.
Bye.